and welcome everyone from around the world. Good afternoon here from New York, upstate New York, or good evening or good morning from wherever you are. We are thrilled to have you here today, and we are super excited. I know I am super excited to have my very special guest, Sally Helgesen, with us for a full 90 minutes of conversation around Everybody Rise, the opportunities for diversity and inclusion, and the emergence of leaders in this difficult time. So before I introduce Sally and kick off our conversation, I'm aware that we have a very large audience, and we have a hybrid audience today. We have folks that come joining us from the Institute of Coaching's affiliate and fellow membership from around the world, and we also have a number of leaders and folks that are interested in this topic that may or may not be familiar with the Institute of Coaching. So I want to take 1 minute just to share with you a little bit about the Institute of Coaching for those of you that might be interested in learning more about what we do. The Institute of Coaching is a nonprofit research and education institute based as an affiliate at Harvard Medical School, and our programs are committed to developing the evidence base or the scientific underpinnings of the emerging and growing profession of coaching. We focus on programs in leadership coaching, positive psychology, education, health and wellness coaching, a whole range of the coaching profession. We also sponsor webinars, leadership forums, support huddles, and all sorts of community building opportunities during this challenging time for our affiliates and members across the world. So we have over 1,200 members, we have over 300 fellows, and we're really looking to build the profession of coaching with an evidence-based foundation. So those of you that are not coaches or are leaders interested in coaching, we hope you will check out the Institute of Coaching at our website, where there are lots of free resources and articles and opportunities to learn more about best practices in coaching at www.instituteofcoaching.org. And now, to kick off our fireside chat, I am so excited to have my friend and colleague and really world-renowned expert in women's leadership, Sally Helgesen, with me today. Let me just take a minute. I know a lot of you know about Sally's work, but I want to take 1 second to introduce you to Sally for those of you that may not be familiar with her background. Sally is cited in Forbes as the world's premier expert on women's leadership, a best-selling author, speaker, and leadership coach. She's been named number 6 on the Global Gurus list of top leadership experts, and as the Thinkers 50 Marshall Goldsmith #1 coach for women leaders. Her recent book, co-authored with Marshall Goldsmith, How Women Rise, is really the key resource for examining the behaviors most likely to get in the way of successful women, and I will add others that we'll talk about, as they seek to move to a higher level. She's been a best-selling author for over 20 years and a public speaker and extremely well-known in the area of women's leadership, starting all the way back in the 90s with The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership, The Female Vision, Women's Real Power at Work, and my favorite, the book that introduced me to you, Sally, many years ago, The Web of Inclusion, A New Architecture for Building Great Organizations. One of my all-time favorite books, probably the one that introduced me to the field of diversity and inclusion, and also gave me the opportunity to meet you many, many years ago. So I'm very, very excited to welcome Sally to our webinar today and to kick off our conversation with, I hope would be, I guess, a realistic assessment of the situation, right, Sally? So I welcome you, and maybe give us your thoughts on the paradox that we're sitting in today. We're going to have a conversation about the opportunity that is arising at this time for women and I think diverse leaders, but it's also a really difficult time. There's no question about that. So thoughts from you to kick us off at how we manage or work with that paradox.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's just wonderful to be with you today and to see these names coming in from all around the globe. This is a very exciting moment. And to me, is an example of what is positive about the period that we're living in. It offers so many opportunities. Now, I'm glad you framed and teed this up in the way that you did, because I would say that I probably tend to be a pretty optimistic, glass half full type of person, and it has not gone unremarked, I must say, that anybody who would publish a book called The Female Advantage about women in business in 1990 must be optimistic, if not actually delusional. So I tend to always look at, what are the opportunities in a period of time, and this one, I believe, is rich, but it's also frightening. And the uncertainty, I don't think any of us who have not lived through actual war, which I'm sure that since our viewers are signing in from all over the world, our participants, there are people who have, but I'm not sure that anybody who's not lived through actual war has had the mental preparation for the degree of uncertainty that we are facing. And of course, the enormous pain, because many people have been sick and people have died. I live in the Hudson Valley. We're both in the Hudson Valley right now, on different sides of the beautiful river. But I lived in New York for many, many years. So I really personally know about 6 people who died, and it's all been, very, very painful. So I want to acknowledge that and the difficulty. And I'm hearing from clients who've had budgets cut, and they're just facing uncertainty. But I do find this to be a fascinating time, in part because I believe that as we come out of it, the people who have been able to exhibit flexibility, who have been skilled at collaboration, who have helped others be visible, because it's a very challenging time. And it's one of the questions I get from a lot of people: how do I stay visible when I'm not in the office? They're just, I believe that 2 outcomes will really be big from this time. One is that those kinds of orientations, those kinds of skills, that kind of leadership is going to be more in demand as we move out of it. The lessons, I'm sure many of you have seen a piece that got a lot of traction from a colleague, Aviva Cox-Wittenberg, where she noted that, with the exception of South Korea, the countries that had negotiated this crisis with the greatest skills had been countries led by women. And I don't believe that will go unnoticed. And so I think that there will be a shift to some degree in terms of how we understand leadership. And I think that particularly for women as well, one of the things that has struck me and has stayed with me, and that I'm eager to write about in my next book, is that I don't think this shift to doing a lot of work virtually is going to be confined to this time. I read an interview with the CEO of Tata, that giant conglomerate, Mumbai-based, and he was saying that Tata has been sort of at the forefront of work from home, big global workforce, and they've had maybe 20% of their people work from home. And he believes that going forward, almost 70% of people will be working from home. And although there are many challenges to that right now, when children are home and there's homeschooling and all kinds of things are going on, what strikes me is that it's really the first time since the Industrial Revolution that the site of work has been shifted to the domestic sphere, which has historically been women's turf. So I think that also is going to make very large changes and long-term differences. So I think we're in for a time of structural realignment, and that there are a lot of good opportunities here.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that you're hitting on a couple of key points that sort of point to the silver lining and yet honor, the pain and the disruption and the challenge that so many people are experiencing. It's as simple as reconfiguring your home to be able to have an office, and reconfiguring your work-life balance as a woman or a man, or as complicated
Yes.
as an article that I read yesterday in Strategy and Business, and I know you contribute to them. And there was a wonderful article about how the power of corporate culture or organizational culture will become even more crucial, because you won't be able to do necessarily the simple things that you used to be able to do of pulling people together and having town hall discussions. And now building culture and community needs to be much more explicit and much more of a focus
Yes.
around connection and emotional intelligence. And that, I think, is where there is an opportunity for women and perhaps introverts and other people from cultures that have traditionally not been sort of the type A, rational, sort of data-driven leaders to come to the fore. And I'm seeing that in my coaching practice. So before we go on, I want to just hold on one second, Sally, because I want to just encourage folks to chat in the chat box, because I'm going to do my best. We have a lot of folks, and Sue's going to help me with reading questions. And I want to get Sally to walk through some of the key points in her amazing new book. And we'll talk a little bit about how that aligns with some of the things that I've written about in mine. And we will try to get to as many questions as we can. But I'm just going to ask you to put questions in the Q&A and comments in the chat, just because that helps Jeff work his ADD. So if you can help me out, and we'll do our best as we switch to Q&A to get to as many as we can. But we are recording this, and we will keep a record of all the questions so that we can hopefully get back to folks if we don't get to everything. So Sally, you were about to say.
I was really just about to say that I strongly agree. I read that piece in Strategy and Business, and I'm just finishing a giant 5,000 word piece for them now about what I've witnessed watching women's leadership evolve for the last 30 years. So that has been a big focus of mine over the last month or so. But I strongly agree with that. How do you create culture when you don't have people in place? And ironically, I think that it drives, the technology that we've talked about this for a while back in the early 2000s. There was that, high tech, high touch mantra. And I think that we're going to find that even more true, that people feel a need for connection. And this goes whether you're an introvert who's kind of glad not to have to be showing up all the time, or whether you're an extroverted person who's at home and feeling quite frustrated because you don't have the people around you that you used to. But people have that longing for connection in this period of time. And that's not going to be satisfied with that sort of just get to the bottom line, give me the numbers, very, highly data-driven approach that has been a dominant strain in senior leadership development over, the last 20 years. So it's been changing. I think our definition of how excellence in leadership is defined has evolved tremendously over the 30 years that I've been watching it. But I think here we have another turning point where qualities like listening and the capacity to pull ideas out of people that they may not have even known they had, which takes some time to do. It takes some patience to do. I think that's going to be, a very good thing, a very positive thing. And it does drive the emphasis on culture and on how your leadership style and capability aligns with what the culture is trying to create.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that, in fact, there's an opportunity here for us to perhaps transcend some of the boundaries and silos that we have, to a certain extent, artificially created. So for example, a simple one is the introvert extrovert. I mean, I think of myself
Yes.
as an extrovert, and I think some people call themselves introverts, that they find these like Zoom calls difficult, but I find them tiring too. I mean, I think we are all finding this to be exhausting, and I very much value my private time. So I'm sort of looking at how can we transcend these limitations of introvert and extrovert. I'm finding some of my introvert clients are speaking up when they're asked to be participants in a Zoom call. They show up and they have a lot of impact. They have a lot of influence. Along the same lines, what we've called masculine and feminine, right, are starting
Yes.
to break down as categories, I think, because some of the most powerful leadership qualities that I've seen in the last 2 months have come from men, and especially women, as you point out, in some of the most successful countries. But like even in New York with Andrew Cuomo, regardless of politics, I mean, he has had the ability to show empathy and compassion and those soft skills that we might historically have called female skills. And so it seems like some of those categories are starting to blend or break down. Do you think that that's something that we can keep alive as we go forward? That's really, I think, an opportunity for coaches.
I think it's something we can keep alive because it's been happening under our noses, but often hard to recognize and see for quite some time. You know, when I started working with women leaders, it really was a consequence of the Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership, published in 1990, which was the first book that looked at what women had to contribute as leaders rather than how they needed to change and adapt, which is what everything had focused on before that. And when I talked about some of the skills that women brought, you know, an emphasis on building strong relationships across levels, a bias for direct communication, a comfort with as opposed to tolerance of diversity because they had been outsiders themselves and understood not just what condescending behaviors and expectations felt like, but also the kind of contribution that people with fresh eyes could bring, and the willingness to lead from the center as opposed to the top. I'm not saying, of course, that all women demonstrate these, but when I talked about these as female leadership qualities at their best, you know what the response I got for 5 years at least was, those aren't leadership skills. Those are soft skills. That has
Right.
changed. That has changed over 30 years. We recognize soft skills. My old pal, Tom Peters, says, you know, what's hard is now soft, and what's soft is hard. The soft skills are difficult. The hard numbers, as we saw in the financial crisis, are often pretty soft. So that's what I've watched. So I think the evolution of leadership and our understanding of excellence in leadership over the last 30 years supports exactly what you're suggesting.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that more and more leaders are beginning to recognize that it's actually not an either or proposition, hard versus soft. It's another one of those false dichotomies, because as you just said, the financials are soft and the emotional agility is hard. So, you know, everything is being turned on its head. And then when that happens, it's best to just throw out the distinction. I know when I was writing my book about, and I came across left brain, right brain, and I was writing about creativity versus productivity and the agility as leaders need to go back and forth. And then I didn't know myself that the scientists have disproven that there is any left brain or right brain. There's just one brain, right? So there's so many ways in which we've created these silos. So there's maybe one silver lining that they begin to crumble and integrate.
Well, I agree with that. And just say one more thing on this, you know, what I said about that we'll all be working on the domestic turf. That, not all be working, but a good percentage of people will. That gives us a more common experience. But one of the other things that I've noticed over the last 30 years that really erodes these boundaries is if you look historically back until the advent of digital technologies, men and women always used different tools to do their work. You can go back to the hunter-gatherer era. Women were digging in the ground with a spade, and men were throwing the bow, the bow and arrow, and hunting, the game that was running after them. Go through human history, go up to the industrial era. We had women on looms, men on with heavy machinery. Post-industrial, women were known by the typewriter. I got a gold charm of a typewriter for my charm bracelet, graduation from college, to show I was going to be a career gal. So we were known by our different tools. And this is really the first time in human history that human beings, men and women, children and adults, have all used the same tools to do their work. So again, that begins to erode the barriers, the differences. It gives us a common language, it might not always be an advantage when you spend half your dinner hour discussing, your latest technology glitch, but it's something that's significant. So I agree with you. We're breaking down these barriers, and I believe that a time of crisis like this gives us an opportunity to further erode them.
I totally agree. And, and I think we're going to toggle back and forth between the opportunity and the challenge in this conversation, because I'm already seeing a couple of really powerful questions from our audience around how the unfortunate reality, not just women, but minorities in general, are being hurt out of proportion by this pandemic, socioeconomically. Women are, it's like exacerbating that dynamic that still exists of pay for work and running the family and all of those things. So, we'll, as I said, we'll go back and forth, right, between the opportunity and the challenge. But share your advice or your thoughts on what especially coaches can do to support their female or perhaps diverse clients to make the most of that very difficult situation.
In the workshops that I do for How Women Rise, which is focused on 12 habits or behaviors that are most likely to get in the way of successful women as they seek to move higher, and which I have to say, from day one, I was inundated with men who said, I identify with 4 or 5 of these characteristics as well.
As I did.
I know. But I think they were just the characteristics that got left out of Marshall's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. So How Women Rise really focuses on those habits and behaviors most likely to get in the way of successful women. And that is, we have an incredible opportunity. So it's very much looking not at the structural and cultural barriers that hold women back, which exist and are real, and that apply certainly to other diverse people, as very much so. But it was looking at what you can do about your own leadership development to better position yourself. And there are 12 of these habits and behaviors. So when I do workshops, which I, until March 9th, was doing, 2 or 3 a week all around the world, really enjoying them. When I do workshops, I tended to put them in buckets, and they fell under 3 dispositions or 3 characteristics. And those were the capacity to be intentional, the capacity to connect in a way that supports what you intend to achieve or contribute, and the capacity to be present. So I bucketed those habits or behaviors. And what I have found for myself and for the people I've been coaching and for the coaches that I've been talking to is that very simple rubric of intentional, connected, and present is especially powerful in this period, and it's challenged in specific ways. Being intentional ordinarily means, being very intentional about thinking about your career development, and most importantly, what it is that you want to contribute to the world, how you want to use the job or position that you have to contribute to the world. Today, there's a lot of uncertainty, and many of us can only manage to be intentional about this day, what we want to contribute this day, how we want to show up on this day, what our intention is. Connected, so important. There are a number of habits in the book, like failing to enlist allies on day one and building rather than leveraging relationships, traps that women often fall into, that come under this idea of connection. But again, in this environment, connection is both more important than it's ever been, because the isolating impact of this. I read yesterday in the New York Times that they're estimating that 1/3 of Americans are struggling with some mental health issues as a result of this. That is breathtaking. Breathtaking to think about that. And that's why connection is so important, but it's hard. You know, being endlessly on Zoom, as you point out, is exhausting. It doesn't feed you in the same way that those human interactions face to face do. We're longing to have coffee with one another.
Right.
So connection is being challenged, but it's also more important. So what I'm finding for my own work is that what my insight on connection was, you know, I used to do my work in person, in Dubai, in Singapore, in Kuala Lumpur, in Sao Paulo, and of course in San Francisco and Chicago and Atlanta and Toronto, all over the world. And there was a certain intensity of the connection. And what I'm finding now is to focus in Zoom on trying to create some degree of real intimacy with people, and that there are opportunities to do that. So being intentional about how we connect and how we use our connections, and then being present, being fully present for the moment, for the person in front of us, for the immediate task, and for our larger commitment, often for this day. Again, much tougher in this environment since we've got so much coming in, so much information, but more and more important probably than it's ever been. So that's one of the things I've been working with, both with coachees and coaches, is helping people to find specific tools that serve their, and I don't mean technology tools, I mean emotional tools and practices that support their ability to be intentional, connected, and present through this time, while acknowledging how tough that is.
Yeah, beautifully said. I think that you're touching on the core of the opportunity and the challenge to get through this with greater connection, a greater sense of community, and maybe less hierarchy. You know, one of the benefits of the corporate world is, yeah, we could be in the hallway and we could have coffee and we could all, but one of the downsides of the corporate hierarchy is that we also had these big board tables that we all sat around, and the boss sat at the head of the table, or the boss had the biggest office on the 70th floor looking down on everyone, or even a private elevator. You know, there are a lot of symbols of power and separation and distinction that are, you know, really hardwired when you're in an office setup. And now I'm talking to a CEO that's in their playroom with their kid. Yeah. And so he is in a sense humanized, or she is in a sense humanized. And that's part of the opportunity. And what I always share with my clients in this same domain of intention and connection is connected back to your book, actually, which is, I remind people that presence is in the moment, right? So it's, as you said, really about being focused on that eye contact. Sometimes it's really small, like it's eye contact, it's a smile. I realize sometimes when I'm on Zoom that I don't smile as much. And so I have to remember. So it's like a small or that you have hands. You know, people on Zooms don't have bodies, they don't have hands. So it's like, sometimes I go like that. I even have a hug on some of my calls, just to remind people that we're all embodied humans. And those are small things. And yet then at the same time, in order to meet what you're describing for intentionality, our clients and our leaders, women and diverse leaders in particular, need to also pay attention to one of the things in your amazing book, which is to try not to focus on being the perfect employee and lose sight of your career, right? So it's like this interesting connection between the little things that bring connection, that make community possible, that tear down the walls of hierarchy. But then for our female clients and our diverse clients, they have to pay attention to their career. Make sure you're staying connected to the long-term goal and not just, as you and Marshall point out in the book, paying attention to being really, really good at your job so that one day someone will notice. When what happens is that a lot of the time people may notice and they may appreciate, but I love one of the things you write about in the book, which is people notice, people appreciate, and then they say, I'll always remember this, I can't remember the exact words, but you said, then they say, you're so good at that job, you should just stay in it.
Exactly right.
And so I always remind my clients that being really good at your job is not enough. You need to leverage and have the big picture. And that's really important now because there's a tendency for us to lose sight of the big picture with all of these day-to-day issues that we're grappling with. So I just think that's a wonderful point.
Yeah, that's why that, sorry to interrupt, that intention is so important there. And you know what you just said, there's so many layers to it. It's so rich. First of all, hierarchies have been eroding for 30 years, and in part because of the technology. And I've always gotten a kick of when you walk into, you're with a group of senior executives and they say, we're dismantling our hierarchy. And I'm thinking, no, the technology's doing it. You're just trying to keep up with it. Because that's been, the experience of people. And that has been, in some ways humanizing itself. And so many of those perks and privileges, I mean, you go out to, real successful Silicon Valley companies, and many of them, not all, but many of them, everybody's got to scramble for parking. There's not a special parking lot for the senior executives. They're not, they don't have the corner office. Everybody's kind of in it together. So, that hierarchical erosion has been going on for 30 years. But again, that humanizing, you're talking to an executive and all of a sudden a cat jumps in his lap and he says, oh, excuse me, I got to get the cat out of the room. That does have, however small and however symbolic, it does really have an effect. And one of the things I'm finding, and you really zoomed in on this one, not to make a pun, but one of the most popular, of course, a couple of the habits that we talk about in How Women Rise, people just love. Expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions is way up there. Overvaluing expertise as a habit to get in your way, putting your job before your career, but certainly the perfection trap, which is very, very common. And this particularly applies not just to women, but to diverse employees of all kind, feeling that they have to do a perfect job in everything that they do.
I find that to be particularly appropriate and pertinent for tech engineering.
Oh yeah.
And folks from Asian cultures where their culture is all about being the best at their job, and then they get passed over for leadership jobs because they didn't develop the leadership skills. They developed the best coding skills or the best infrastructure skills or whatever it is. And that's where what you're sharing in that book is so relevant to so many populations.
It's so true. And I see that play out with African Americans, with Latinos. they feel they're being judged. Everything they're doing is being scrutinized. So it all has to be perfect. And what part of the real problem of the perfection trap is that it creates a lot of stress. And I can speak to having worked with women for 30 years, but I know, because I've been in the room, that very often when a woman who has spent her career showing up as being precise and correct, and by the way, research shows that women tend to be promoted based on being precise and correct. So the message women get is being precise and correct will get you to the top.
That's an irony.
Yeah, but then you sit in the meetings where they're deciding they've got 3 candidates, and one candidate is a woman, and they don't see her as a leader Sure, of course, sometimes it's the, just the unconscious bias, but sometimes it's also because she has spent so much time trying to be perfect and doing everything right that she creates stress. She creates stress for herself and she creates stress for other people. I've been doing this for many, many decades. Never once heard anybody say, man or woman, I work for a perfectionistic boss and I love it. No one ever says that. So you don't, if you're trying to always be perfect, you are creating stress. And one of the things about this period of time is that none of us have the opportunity to be perfect. We're all kind of making it up as we go along. I keep thinking back to the frontier days where people were kind of improvising how they were going to live on the frontier, how they were going to coexist, how they were going to develop an economy, how they were going to develop communities. And I think we're facing something in some ways long term going forward that's a bit similar. And it's no time, there is no way to be a perfect frontiers person or a pioneer. By definition, you're learning as you're going along. So I think this is a fantastic time for people to practice letting go of perfection. I have always done a lot of webinars. When I used to do them, because I did, a couple a month, I would have signs around the house, recording in process, enforce a code of silence, putting the animals, locking them away. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And now I'm doing 3 a day and I can't do that. So I have had to let go trying to control the perfection of everything I do. And I'm hearing from a lot of people that that's what they've had to do too. And that's good because we can't, there's so much we can't control. And that attempt to make it perfect is really what creates stress. And we can't.
And also holds people back
Yeah.
from developing their leadership capacities.
It does.
The other area that I love that you write about with Marshall is it's sort of a follow-on. I know these kind of all fall into categories, right? But I have used this with so many clients, and that although I've taken a little bit of liberty with it, but you write about being too much. Women are sometimes thought of as being too emotional or just too much. And I also see I stretch it with some of my clients that some of my introverted, culturally different clients, culturally diverse clients, are too little. Yeah. They feel like they should hold back because they're being respectful. They're trying to be appropriate when actually you're in the American culture, and the American culture it's about being respectful, but it's also about being direct and about speaking up and about having an opinion and about having the answer and about having brainstorming. And so I have clients on both ends of the spectrum where, especially for women, they get dinged for being too much. And, it's a classic. I have one client who's an emergency room doctor, and she's amazing as a leader, like extraordinary, compassionate, brilliant scientist, and dealing with COVID. And yet her boss, the hospital administrator, says, oh, well, Mary is not her real name, but she's just, sometimes she's too much. And it's like, I'd be so grateful to have that kind of too much if I had COVID, right? And, she said to me, Jeff, I'm not going to shut it down. I'm going to keep being bigger and bigger and bigger until I have his job. And I said, I'm glad I'm your coach because we're going to go for it. And then I have others at the other end of the spectrum who, like on Zoom calls, are asking me, so how can I be more visible? Because they were more naturally kind of holding back and being, in a sense, too small. And now if they don't speak up, it used to be that they were in the room, so they were at least there. Yeah. And they would occasionally say, but now they're not even in the room. I have clients who won't even go on video. They just want to stay in the background. Yes. And I'm like, no, this is a huge opportunity. Nobody, as you said, Sally, nobody's trying to be perfect. So nobody can be perfect. So, this is an opportunity for you to speak up and be part of the conversation, perhaps in a new way. So it's kind of working both ends of the spectrum, at least from a coach's standpoint. I don't know if you have a thought on that.
Two things that I think, that really resonate with me there is that in terms of these communication behaviors, and I have minimizing is one. I just have one thing to say, or
Right.
it may not be important, or something really, and then too much, too many words, too much emotion, those perceptions that people have, it's people, if you just, you don't want to get too on the side of like, well, that's just me, I'm being authentic. Okay, that's fine. And yes, that's good, but is that going to serve you in terms of what you want to contribute? That's the underlying question.
Right.
And but one thing, when people get very self-conscious about this, how they're coming across, I always say, first of all, the people who do the best job with it are prepared. So if you're nervous about contributing, have a couple thoughts that you have well rehearsed, write them down, and be, ready to contribute. If you have had a lot of feedback that you are too much, providing, as Marshall puts it, and what got you here won't get you there, too much value. You can, I've done this before, write on my hand where it says, why am I talking? That means, do I really have something to say here, or am I just kind of running my mouth? So that preparation is really helpful, especially with the kind of virtual environment that we're in now. But the other thing that what you were talking about reminded me is, when we get too involved in managing other people's perceptions, we don't give them a chance to get used to us. And I had a great example. I've talked about this before, but I had a great example of this early in my career. I was in corporate communications. I was in a meeting with all the senior guys. That was the only woman, and I was also the lowest ranking person there. And it was back in, the hierarchical era. So we were, it was very formal. And I had what I thought was a great idea. So I volunteered it and shared it. And as we were leaving the room, my boss's boss kind of sidled up to me and said, boy, you're sure not afraid to share your opinion, in the most condescending and nasty way. And I don't know why, but I just said, no, I'm not. I didn't say, oh, I'm so sorry, was I inappropriate? And I didn't say, well, I had a right to, I just said, no, I'm not. And he just walked off. I thought, okay, I'm done here. And you know what? About a month later, I heard him in a room. He didn't know I was there, saying to a coworker, you know what I like about Sally is she really says what she's not afraid to share an opinion. In other words, I gave him time to get used to it. So I often urge people to do that. If you, as long as you feel that, what you had to contribute really was of value and you didn't go on and on forever, don't try to manage everybody's impressions. Give them a chance to come up to really recognizing your value over time.
Yeah, I love that story. You're reminding me of a situation that I just had literally yesterday with an amazing female leader who works at a pharmaceutical firm. And she has, working out of home in New England and doing a great job with a lot of emotional intelligence and emotional agility for her team, which is spread out all over the world. They're researchers. But she's frustrated with her boss, who is a man, and he does not have that level of emotional intelligence. Really, he's kind of still, everything's fine, just make sure your people are productive and you're doing a great job. And she and I were having a conversation, how do I get him to pay attention to what needs to be looked at in the current situation? And as you said, she was suggesting that she be kind of more of a sledgehammer with him. And I didn't tell her what to do, obviously. I'm just coaching and listening. But I suggested to her, instead of doing that, like instead of slamming him for being too, in denial or too strong, just be curious. Because maybe something's going on with him. And so we came up with, I love what you said about being prepared, because she had been entering into these conversations kind of ad hoc, once a week, and his response was, oh, everything's fine, you're doing great, click, and she's frustrated. So I said, instead of just going in having ad hoc, why don't you prepare some real powerful questions? Be curious, what's going on for him? Ask for his advice. bring him a problem and say, Peter, it's not his real name, Peter, could you tell me one or two things you would do as the leader to deal with this difficult situation? I'm really curious how you would handle it. And she was so excited. She was like, oh, I can go back and like dig underneath. And I'm like, yeah, play detective. Because he's a human being, but he's just doing his box thing. And now that he's out of the box, you have an opportunity. So we'll be interested to see. But I think you're right. It's like also helping people get kind of dig under, get used to this change, create and open. It's like slowly opening the can. And she will learn to be a more effective leader, regardless of what he does, because she can't control how he'll respond.
Exactly.
I love that example.
Should we take some questions? I can see
Yes,
they're pouring in.
we
We've got
are, and I've been reading. Yeah, I've been reading them. One that stuck out at me that I thought you could maybe tackle is a question I haven't seen on a webinar yet, and that is, how would you coach a woman who's finding that as things move along in this pandemic, the silos are being rebuilt again? In other words, this is going from sprint where everything was breaking open, and now it's into the marathon. And how would you coach a woman who wanted to keep those silos from being rebuilt?
I think the most effective way that you keep silos from being rebuilt is through relationships. That the most subversive force that operates against silos is relationships that are not part of the official org chart. So the two things that I think are helpful in this case are, number one, to be very intentional about keeping up a broad base of relationships. In the words of the Web of Inclusion, build your web. A web is not an up and down, it is a broad, it's in the shape of a spider web, so that you put yourself at the center of things and keep building your own relationships that cross boundaries up and down in hierarchical terms. And the other thing I think, and this is a lesson that came from doing the Web of Inclusion for me, but I've found particularly useful with clients in this period of time. And so I've been talking about it more than I've been talking about it for 25 years, probably, because that's when the Web of Inclusion came out, if you can believe it, 95. But when I was doing the Intel case study for the Web of Inclusion about how Intel had managed to come up with a strategy that totally transformed the entire company and who their customer base was and how they operated. That is the Intel Inside strategy. And that strategy had not come from the senior leaders within Intel, but from small units that were trying to solve specific problems within the company, and who got a budget to begin to try to do things differently and came up with a solution, and then sold it to the leadership of the company. So I was fascinated by that. I was studying it. And because the Web of Inclusion was basically about organizations that are good at getting strategic level ideas from people on the front lines. What distinguishes those organizations? And one of the early interviews I had was with a guy who was, I think, the fourth hire at Intel, if you can imagine. He was an engineer, Ted Jenkins. I still remember his name. I remember sitting with him in his office, and I said, why is Intel able to do this? And he said, Intel is able to do this because we explicitly recognize and honor that there are four kinds of power in every organization. There's the power of position, which is the hierarchical position where you stand and how you can engage resources based on your position. That's one kind of power. But there's also the power of connections, who you know, how much you can put people together and call on people to engage resources. Power of connections. There's the power of personal authority. which is the trust people have in you, how they value you. And then there's the power of expertise. And he said, and we explicitly acknowledge those. And he said, hierarchical organizations that can't get strategic, that are, what we today would probably call toxic, but are really poor at pulling ideas from their people across levels. He said, they only acknowledge positional power. They focus on positional power, not the other kinds of power. So I would say when you see the silos starting to come back, keep your own connections going, build them broadly, and build your power of personal authority, expertise, and connections, because those are the subversive forces that work against the centralization of hierarchical power.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love the word. I love that it's subversive.
Yeah.
I think in today's world, it's more, what's the opposite of subversive? It's more visibly versive. I'm not sure what the word is, but I'd love to just add one to your list of three. And I think
Right.
what I would call the power of coalitions. Because in the last few years, I think that there's been a strong influence building capability around some of these employee resource groups.
Yes.
Diversity of people of color groups, LGBTQ support groups within organizations where they come together and as a voice, they're louder, they're more impactful, they're more influential. And when I've done some, they were live sessions on my book around leadership agility for people of diverse backgrounds, for people of color, for the LGBTQ community. And they were surprised when I suggested to them that they should invite the other resource groups, like invite the women's group, invite the people of color group. And they were like, no, we're the LGBTQ group, so we don't invite. And I'm like, no, this is called the power of coalition. You build, yes, you can be special and you can be inclusive. And it became such a rich, amazing conversation because there are LGBTQ people of color. And there are LGBTQ people of color that are women. It's like, and some of them are even Christian. I mean, there's so many, or from Asia. So there's so many different ways that you can build a coalition once you're recognizing that that's a source of power. So that will impact the hierarchies, even if they start to rebuild. So I just want to add that one to the list.
Just very briefly, that's great. That's terrific. And I have watched, because I've watched the employee resource group since they first came on the scene. And what I saw in the beginning is they were so focused with definition. Well, does this person join this group or that group? And what do you do if you have a woman of color, and should they go, and should there be separate women of color? And I remember working with a big food processing company, and they were, well, what do you do? Should you include the African employees, because they had a lot of them, with the Afro-Americans, or should they have then, well, what if they're from different tribal groups? And it just became, a route to balkanization, really. And I thought, this is not how it should be used. And what I've seen over recent years is much more of that. And I hadn't used the phrase coalition building, but absolutely, they're stronger in numbers and stronger in looking for the commonalities that we share. That's how you build community, looking for the commonalities we share rather than what is distinctive. Honoring what is distinctive, but looking for the commonalities.
And right now, there's more commonality than ever before because we're all going through the same thing. We're all having a different experience of it.
Yeah.
And we want to be careful that we don't project that everyone has Zoom or everyone is in their country house. But we are all experiencing the same kind of challenge and the same kind of thing. I want to go back to a question that came up at least 3 or 4 times, Sally. So people are dying to get your coaching advice on perfectionism. Perfection, how do women or people of color, because we've had 2 or 3 different people asking, what advice or coaching would you give someone who has that tendency to be a perfectionist, or also works for a company that somebody else said, my company tends to reinforce that perfectionism. How do I work through that?
Well, I'll take the second point first because it's really important. And in fact, there is a cultural disposition toward perfectionism, particularly where it relates to women and people of color. That you kind of, the cultural expectation is if you want to position yourself well, you have got to do things perfectly. Whereas, you know, for the white male mainstream, you get promoted based on your connections, on your visibility, and on the perception that you're a big picture, long-term strategic thinker, and that's what works. So I think to start with, you want to start early by managing expectations. One of the ways to do this, and it's very helpful addressing your own perfectionism, but also addressing perfectionism if you have a perfectionistic boss, is you want to ask the question always with everything: what here needs to be done 100%? What needs to be done 90%? What needs to be done 80%? Because not everything needs to be done 100%. There are things that are very important that need to be done to 100%, but most things don't. Most drafts, I was in corporate communications before I started, entering this field that I found myself in with the publication, The Female Advantage. And I found that, I worked in companies where you had 13 drafts of a speech for the senior executive, and every single one of them was supposed to be perfect. So you're just wasting a lot of resources. And going back, I wish I had always asked that question: does this need to be done 80%? These eyes won't be on it. So it's an important question to ask. You usually get pushback. Well, of course it needs to be done 100%. And it doesn't generally serve. Now, I made this point. I was doing a program in London last fall when traveling to London was part of life for me. And I had said, there's some things that, of course, you want done 100%. I said, for example, surgery. And afterwards, this was unforgettable. One of the women who was there came up to me and said, I wanted to mention the point you made about surgery needing to be done needing to be done perfectly. And I said, yes. And she said, well, I'm the head of ophthalmology at the Royal College of Surgery. She said, and I am here to tell you that the worst surgical outcomes are all had by perfectionists, the absolute worst, because they're inflexible. They can't, they have a picture of how everything's supposed to go, and if it doesn't, they kind of lose it. And they have their team so terrified that they can't get, good information. So I think it's really important to try to manage expectations at every step of the way. And then it's also important to manage your own expectations, because we begin to internalize that expectation of perfectionism. And my great learning, for myself, being the good daughter and the Catholic girl student about perfectionism, so I was really primed for it. My great learning came from working with Marshall Goldsmith, who is one of the least perfectionists, very hardworking, very much not a perfectionist. And I remember we were, I worked with him on a number of occasions where I watched him really mess something up, forgetting to call the CEO of the World Bank when it was on his calendar. And every time he would mess something up, he would just kind of go, oh, well. And I think, really? And then I think, if I forgot to call the CEO of the World Bank, would I be saying, oh, well? Hardly. So I put a big sign on my wall, on my office wall, that says, oh, well. And I try to look at that all the time when I'm giving myself a hard time. Doing a program at Google, and one of the women raised her hand. She said, my favorite thing was, oh, well, your oh, well story. She said, so I have signs up all over the house that say, oh, well. She said, and the other day, my 3-year-old walked into the kitchen carrying a bowl of yogurt, tripped, spilled it all over the place, and went, oh, well. She said, so I decided I'm raising the next generation of strong women. So I think we need little ways to remind ourselves, how important is this in the scheme of things. But we also want to manage expectations and try to guide our organizations and the people we work with and for to understand that a culture of perfectionism doesn't serve excellence in surgery, for one thing, as I learned, but it doesn't serve also, a creative, innovative, harmonious team.
Creativity is not served at all with perfectionism. No one ever came up with a great world-changing idea by thinking they had to come up with the perfect thing from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's usually one of the ways that I like to coach perfectionists is by asking them, where are they creative and how do they work through their creativity?
That's smart.
Because when you're being creative, whether it's with a hobby, you really don't have the luxury of being a perfectionist. If you're trying to learn how to play the cello and you're a beginner and you're a perfectionist, you're going to be screwed. Because as soon as you hear yo-yo ma, you're going to think, oh my God, and you're going to stop. So you just have to kind of give yourself a break and realize that creative processes come through iterations and trial and error. And you look like you're about to say something.
I am, because it's really reminding me that, I did this program at a big defense contractor, and the head of HR came up afterwards and she said, we find that the perfectionism of our female engineers tends to cause them to be highly risk averse.
Yeah.
This is very, directive in terms of how people can work with perfectionism. And she said, so one of the things we try to do is we try to move them along and put them in positions that they're not ready for yet, so that they can get used to understanding what not being ready, not being able to fulfill perfectly, what that feels like. So that's the third coaching thought I have, which really goes along with what you said, which is so smart, asking them to think about where they're creative, is that, put yourself in position where you're doing stuff that you can't be good at. Get used to that idea.
Be a beginner.
Yeah, exactly. Don't just do things that you're good at. Try some things that you're lousy at, and learn to get comfortable with taking risks.
Yeah, beautifully. Yeah, I think that if you can get back to another thing I use is asking my perfectionist clients if they were always perfect when they were 4.
They may have been trying to be.
It's probably where it started, right?
If they were girls, they were probably trying to be perfect.
I try to go back far enough so that there was a playful, when the doll fell down, or when I wasn't able to get that, the model airplane together, I didn't want to, throw it across the room. Anyway, I'd love to ask you, there's one question that came in that's really, I think, kind of juicy and maybe even a tough question. Would you be up for that? Sure. Maybe you saw it go by, but I scrolled past her name, so I'm going to forget. I'm going to be not the perfectionist and not remember the person's name.
Oh, well.
But I thought it was a really profound question, and I wouldn't know how to answer it. And that is, especially since I am part of it. So she's wanting to know about how we help dominant groups, like the one that I'm in, and to a certain extent, the one that you're in, depending upon how you define diversity, become more aware of the challenges that non-dominant groups really face. I think that this is just really pertinent right now. I mean, there was this horrific story about what happened yesterday in Central Park that you may have heard about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and the woman apologized, and that's great.
Big deal. Sorry, glad she lost her job.
Yeah, but it's like, why does that even have to happen? Like, anyway, can you comment on what can we as coaches do when we're working with dominant, the dominant paradigm folks, whether it's men, white, women, whatever way you want to, how do we become more ourselves, even more self-aware and more aware of the challenges?
There are two things that I would have to say on this, and I probably shouldn't have said what I said, but I'm tired of people, exhibiting bad behaviors and then skating on them. I just find that outrageous. There are two things I think in regard to that. The first is, I have to say in my work, I've become much less focused on helping people identify their unconscious biases, and more focused on helping them identify behaviors that will get them to different results. Because I don't believe that people who are as impacted by what their leaders actually think in their minds than they are impacted by how those leaders behave, how they exhibit behaviors. The other thing is, I think that behaviors, when we change our behaviors, we change our experience. And when we change our experience, that begins to change our minds in an authentic way. We begin to think, oh, I never really thought about that. So I think that's a more effective way. Let me give you an example. I was working with this guy who was the CEO of an energy company. It was a great guy. It was a really very open, humane human being. And he, whatever unconscious biases he had or didn't, but he didn't demonstrate them usually in his behaviors. And I went to his office. I had been in his office before, and he had this big sign that said, be brief, be brilliant, and be gone. And I said, Martin, what's that with your sign there?
Yeah, wow.
Be brief, be brilliant, and be gone. And he said, well, someone gave it to me and I thought it was funny. And so I let him put it there. And I said, well, that's fine. But I said, I don't think it's that funny personally. However, have you thought about what that says? You're the CEO. Have you thought about what that says to people? So a little gesture like that can really undercut people's confidence and perception that, they're going to be able to be heard by this individual. And I think that cluing leaders into behaviors that would get them better results with diverse people would be more useful often. And I'm not saying this is kind of controversial, and I'm sure that, there are plenty of people on this call who are very involved in unconscious biases, things, and have seen some good results. Although I often hear from clients that they've, rolled out massive unconscious bias programs and they haven't seen that many changes. But I think that cluing people into behaviors that would change the interactions they have with people would be a much better way of helping them with that. That said, the other thing that I've seen really work, and I participated in a program once with a talk about a tough crowd. They were the senior managing partners of global law firms, and these were tough guys. And I remember one of the exercises they were asked to do was to think back and then really share the details of a time when they had felt like an outsider or felt not heard and not understood. And with most of them, some of them just like, never happened to me, it just totally walled off. But the ones who did that, they always went back to something that had happened with one of their children, and then began to share about the pain that they felt when they saw the misunderstanding of a son who was autistic, or, a daughter who had some behavioral or physical disability, and the pain that, that stirred in them. And then it was a surprising news to them that this is often what employees felt when they felt that they couldn't be heard or valued. I believe that people perceive inclusion as being valued for their potential as well as their contributions. And research supports that, shows, for example, that with women and African Americans, they tend to be recognized what they've contributed, but their potential leadership often doesn't have a clue. So helping leaders to understand and to dig down more and to be investigative and be curious about what people's potential is and open up those conversations is also a way of doing that. But in terms of getting to some degree of emotional identification with what it feels like to be an outsider, and a lot of insiders are terrified of that, which is why they're insiders. They spent their life building a thing. I belong here. I belong to this group. This is where my identity is. But stirring in them, the feeling of what it's felt like when they didn't feel understood can be helpful, but much better to help them focus on, fake it till you make it, on acting inclusive, exhibiting inclusive behaviors, rather than trying to dig down and reframe their mind before their experiences changed.
I mean, I totally agree. And I'm cautiously optimistic around one theme that has emerged along the lines of what you're speaking to. And I mentioned it when we were on the call, when we were on the show with Marshall the other day. And that is that there has been an evolution away from cultural competence towards what we're calling cultural humility.
Yes.
And I think that is a really powerful thing to share if you're in the right context and you have an opportunity. Many of my clients have global teams or multicultural teams. They may be all in one country, but they come from a whole range of backgrounds. And there was a time that the leadership and development folks, of which I used to be one, would try to develop, their training programs to teach people to know what to do in Thailand or know how Japanese people act. And you have to be this way or that way. And it was very colonialistic in a sense. It's like, we want everyone to become Americanized, but we will learn what's competent in those cultures. And the good news is there's, I think, an opportunity to expand that conversation to a learning approach, which is use inquiry, use curiosity, be humble, learn about what life is like in India, learn about what the culture is like in Korea, learn about what it's like to grow up in Puerto Rico. And if you're a leader, you actually start to gain insights into the strengths that some folks that grew up in very different cultures, very different home situations, maybe much more community oriented, much more communal, maybe much less, a lot of different variations. Yeah. But just to enter into those situations with curiosity. And the reason I bring that up as an add-on to what you were sharing about behavior is that it can also work with the dominant paradigm. Like to actually ask folks, what was it like to grow up as a WASP in New England?
Yeah.
Right? And get people to reflect on how that is different from growing up in Korea or somewhere else. Like, we were a small family and we were very rigid and we had very strict rules around who sat at the dinner table or whatever it is, right? And so when the person in that conversation starts to reflect on how they had a unique experience that might fit the dominant paradigm, they start to realize that it's not the only paradigm. So that can also be an entry into insight. This expansion of what we're calling cultural humility.
I love that phrase, cultural humility. And I really believe that it is going to become a leadership requirement as, in a global economy. And, by the way, this virtuality is also going to serve that, development of an ever more global workforce, because you're not going to have, can we get enough 20, whatever H-2B visas, those kinds of things get taken off the table. So you're really able to look at a global workforce. And if you want to understand anything about the potential of the talent you have to practice a degree of cultural humility. So it's a very powerful concept to me. And again, it's curiosity and asking questions and listening, and demonstrating a behavior of some degree of humility. And I think that's a more fruitful path forward than the unconscious bias one to some degree that we've been on.
Yeah, and I think in my book where I focus on developing agility, one of the themes that sort of permeates everything that I tried to do was to focus on having a both and approach rather than an either or approach. Because it's not about getting rid of the alpha authoritative leadership style. sometimes we need that.
Yeah, yeah.
You need decisive, strong women and men, but it's about including the softer or more inclusive or more diplomatic or more democratic approach, and knowing how to switch back and forth. So the great thing about cultural humility, if you're developing agility, I think as a leader, if you're coaching someone to develop that agility, is that you can look for what are the strengths in that culture.
Yeah.
That you didn't get in your culture. I mean, my partner is Korean.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy because it's so different from the American environment that I grew up in. But I learn every day, if I'm willing to, take off my ego a little bit, but and be humble. But I learn every day about, Korea, for example, South Korea is doing a much better job of handling this pandemic.
Much better, yeah.
And so I'm learning every day, what is it? They're not an autocratic society. They are a democracy. They are, in fact, very similar to the US in the way they do their politics. But culturally, it's very different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's so much to be learned and so much wisdom to be gained from looking at all the different cultures, that hopefully that continues to be the trajectory that since this is a global experience, and I think if nothing else, we are learning that our planet is very small.
Some steps forward, some steps back. Yeah. That's, it's really been my experience.
Right.
As I said, I've been doing this. I've been working in women's leadership and inclusive leadership. And when the Web of Inclusion was published, 95, the idea was helping organizations get good ideas from people on the front line. So there was no real connection to diversity implicit in that. And then I watched as diversity and inclusion became paired, and I saw that is really right, because diversity, and it's important to understand how they're different. How they're different. Diversity is the nature of our global talent pool. Inclusion is the only means by which a diverse workforce can be successfully led. So they're two different things, but they reinforce each other beautifully. Yeah. And cultural humility is a key component of being able to lead inclusively.
I completely agree. And in fact, it's, when I was talking about both and agility, if you think about it, diversity and inclusion or belonging are, again, almost opposites.
Yeah.
Diversity is respecting differences and distinctions and uniqueness, specialness. And inclusion and belonging is all about, we're all the same. We're all in this together. And so if we can learn humbly to hold the tension of those opposites, I think there's hope for the planet. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic. So I'm sensitive that we have only 10 minutes, if you can imagine. It's been an amazing conversation, and I'm so thrilled to be able to have this chat with you. But we have had some folks that are looking for some quick tips about connection during this difficult time. So let's see if you have any thoughts on, building. The question from Natasha: how do we build those connections from a practical standpoint at this time? So what would you offer, Sally?
Well, there are a number of things. I think that part of what we're being given here is a chance to, break down some of the silos between our networks. Every one of us has what you could call a personal network, a tactical network, and a strategic network. And a personal network is that network, that is the support you need to get through your everyday. The tactical network are the people that in your work that you can draw on to help you solve problems, get resources to flow, etc. And your strategic network is the network of people that can help you achieve what you want to achieve in the long run. And these three are breaking down in this period because the people who help us function every day become ever more a part of what our tactical network is, and even our strategic network, because they give us the resources that we have as humans to be able to show up. So I think number one is looking at these silos eroding and realizing that it is important to connect with people during this time as broadly as we can. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a big, time suck, to be direct about it, but we have the excuse right now to, email thousands of people and just say, how are you doing? How is this for you? How has your family been? And I think the more we can do that sort of thing, the more that will come back to us in all kinds of ways. That's expanding that personal network. And we may I've found incredible opportunities just by doing that, reaching out to an old school friend from Kalamazoo, Michigan in the 1960s and saying, how are you doing? I know your husband has heart trouble. Oh my goodness, my daughter works at, this company, and she was telling me they're looking for such and such, and all of a sudden I'm doing some work, a webinar for that company. So I think those things we can think more broadly about. Let's just stay connected. It doesn't have to be, a 1-hour virtual coffee on Zoom. It can be a brief email exchange, but let's let our heart lead us. Let's let our heart lead, we can honor our hearts by asking the question of people broadly, what do you need? How are you doing? So I think that's a really, really important thing. So what I did there was a personal network, but, it turned out to have tactical and strategic implications. So again, in one of our big themes here, Jeff, has been this erosion of boundaries of either
Right.
breaking down either or and both and so I think that's a really important thing to do, and we can't feel that we're so busy that we can't do that.
I totally agree. And I love what you're saying about as the boundaries come down and as the boxes get equalized, whether it's on Zoom or on whatever way we're transmitting our connection, I encourage my clients and even my friends who are introverts or more apt in the historical, like in the corporate setting, to sort of hang back. I encourage them now as an opportunity to be curious.
Yeah.
Check in with people, like you said, that you haven't connected with for a long time, and listen to their stories. And as you said, I mean, it's an amazing opportunity to find, an amazing opportunity to reconnect, but also opportunities emerge from that reconnection, because people will say, oh, I didn't realize that you were here doing that. And I'll just, it's a wonderful opportunity to share how I reconnected with you, right? You and I met in like the mid 90s when we were both part of what was called the World Business Academy at that time. And you had just your book with your wonderful book, The Web of Inclusion. And, here we are more years later than I like to admit. And, I became part of the Marshall Goldsmith Coaching 100. And I loved the book, and I started using your book with my book. And I thought, well, why shouldn't I just reach out to Sally? I did meet her one day and, many years ago, and we had a wonderful connection, and I'm still so aligned with your philosophy. And so it's been a joy to reconnect, and that led to this opportunity to have this conversation. So you just, never know what curiosity will lead to, right?
Curiosity and, that little bit of willingness to take a risk. I'm just going to ask this person, what's going on with them. So I think this, we do have, and again, as you said, not minimizing the pain that people are living through.
Right.
I work with people all the time who are homeschooling 3 children and trying to do their job, and or in a small apartment, or live alone, and haven't had a human interconnection in it's enormous pain there, not to mention people who are sick. Or worried about their aging parents. But it is a magnificent time to explore breaking down some of the boundaries that have kept us separated and emphasizing what is distinctive in our experience, looking for what is common in our experience. What do we share? The fact that I'm looking for that doesn't mean that I'm undervaluing what is distinct. To me, this is what our time is asking us to do. And those of us who can do that will develop the leadership skills that will be needed and required, and hopefully, and certainly not in all cases, but be rewarded and acted on and recognized in the years going forward. So that's my glass half full interpretation.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, and I completely agree. And there's a question that I loved about from Shafali, but we're not going to have time to get to it. But she was asking about labels. Whether or not we should be able to move through seeing each other as labels. And I just want to say one thing about that, and maybe she can follow up with either one of us for further conversation. But I think this is now an opportunity time that if you see people doing labeling, it's okay now to ask.
Yeah.
Are you sure you know what that person's really like?
Yeah.
I said to a female leader who does presentations, a very good friend of mine. She said, "I'm such an extrovert and I'm struggling." And I said, "Jen, are you really an extrovert? What is an extrovert? Think about it. Maybe you could get in touch with your inner introvert." And she was like, "Oh yeah, those are all made up, Jeff, aren't they?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
They're all made up." So it's time, whenever we can, to let go of those labels. It's not going to be that easy, and I don't want to oversimplify, especially some of the, more entrenched labeling that we do. But there's a moment, things are disrupted. When things are disrupted, you can poke the, what do they call it? Poke the pig or something. I don't remember the.
Yeah, you can poke a little hole in it.
Right.
Poke a little hole in it through some, having an open, accepting attitude and being willing to listen and being willing to have things that or believe challenged.
Totally, yes. Well, beautifully said. So I have put up on the screen contact information for you, Sally, and for myself. And I'm very, very open to having anyone who's interested in learning more about the Institute of Coaching, either as a coach to take advantage of resources for your coaching practice around the issue of diversity or women in leadership, or if you're a leader that joined us today and would like to learn more about coaching cultures, write to me or look again at our website. I just feel very honored that the Institute of Coaching sponsors this kind of conversation. And I want to thank you, Sally, for taking the time. And I'm sorry that we have to do this on Zoom since we are literally 20 miles away from each other. And maybe we'll do it live one of these days, but it's still been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it thoroughly. And I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's been sort of on a high level. I think both of us also have a lot of more practical knowledge to share. So I hope to hear from people, and anybody can share about this or be in touch or share their thoughts on LinkedIn. I know I'm very active on that. I believe you are too. And it's just a great conversation to keep going. And I think some of what we brought out today about cultural humility and sort of questioning some of our desire to always emphasize what is distinct as opposed to what is common is going to have resonance going forward.
Totally agree. And I just want everyone to know that this webinar has been recorded and it will be available on our public website. So if you want to watch it again, or if you want to follow up with specific questions for us and you'd like to get reconnected, it'll be available. Usually it takes about 48 hours, but we will be up and available to everyone. So Sally, thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us from all around the world. We wish you all the best as you go through this difficult time. You take care of yourselves, your families, your teams. We wish you safety and health, self-compassion, and we will hopefully emerge better humans on the other side of this. So thank you, Sally. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you, Jeff. I've enjoyed every single moment.
Take care, everyone. We'll see you.